Welcome to Classic 4x4, the podcast for and by classic four-wheel drive enthusiasts. I'm your host, Chris Piccone, and you can follow the podcast on Instagram at Classic4x4 Podcast, and you can follow my trials, tribulations, and antics of collecting and restoring classic four-wheel drives, also on Instagram at Overland by the Sea. We talk a lot about engine swaps, and when we talk about engine swaps, we usually are talking about an LS or a Cummins 12 valve or an R2.8, and it's usually a diesel or a high performance gas engine swap. But one of the things we've talked about on the Classic 4x4 podcast in the past is, and we talked about it with Caleb Jacobs, we just scratched the surface with Caleb on his episode was EV conversions. So I went down a rabbit hole. I'm obsessed with EV conversions. I think it's the coolest thing in the face of the earth. So I said, let me find somebody that can talk intelligently about EV conversions and those powertrain swaps. So today, we're very fortunate to have Nate Bonn, who's the shop manager from Proper EV. What's up, Nate?
Hey, what's going on, man? Thanks for having me.
No, I appreciate your time and talking to our listeners about the EV conversion process and how that works and the components that are involved from start to finish. And for those of you out there that aren't familiar with Proper EV, you got to follow them on all the social channels. Their handle is at Proper EV. Check them out online. propersolutionsgroup.com. They're located in New Milford, Connecticut. So if you're around, stop by and take a look at some of their cool work. You guys are doing some really interesting EV conversions. And one of the things that actually drew me to having this conversation today and reaching out to you is your first truck that you guys did was a 63 Ford Econoline pickup, which is a relatively rare truck in the first place. But what was unique about that is a lot of the EV conversion companies, they're just slapping them in Volkswagens. They're easy, right? I mean, and there were some conversations I was having where that was the only options of people I could talk to, but I really wanted to have a conversation with somebody that's done a truck. And your first proof of concept was a 63 Ford Econoline pickup. And that's what really was what drew me to reaching out to you. And I'm glad you got back to me, and I'm glad we're here having this conversation today. So tell us about not only yourself, but also as the shop manager, you run along with the owner, Mike, you run the shop and the EV conversion process. But tell us about, where did Proper EV come from? I know it was originally a restoration shop, and then you guys started focusing on EV. Tell us your story.
All right, so I'll start with the shop first, I guess. So Mike, he's the owner. He did a bunch of print work. COVID totally nixed his business. He said, I'd like to relax, change the pace, do something different. He had a really great idea. Hey, I'd like to take classic cars and I'd like to convert them to EV. I've seen them in Europe. I've seen them in California. I think this is a great thing to bring to the East Coast. So like you had mentioned, he purchased an existing restoration shop as a place to start, looking for the right personnel, the right equipment, a place with a name already established. So from there, he went about gathering staff, doing paperwork. We are a used car dealership as well, so we're do some full service stuff in the beginning. And then after that, I guess I pop into the equation about 2-3 months after the initial opening of Proper, which is September 2020. So a little bit about myself. I've done some form or another of wrench turning for most of my life, but I went to tech school. I did big name restoration work for a while, some other small things, and then I found my way here down to Proper. So like you said, I handle the day-to-day, everything that involves going in and out. I would say for the most part, we are primarily focused on the experience of everything. We don't want to be a mass shop. We don't want 27 cars in the shop. Every one of these cars has a story, and we really just want to continue telling it. These vehicles have been around, 40, 60, 70, 80, 100 years, and there's no reason why they shouldn't be around for 100 more. So it's, we feel like it's our job to keep these things going. And, this is just one way to do it. I know it's not for everybody, and some people are going to hate this, but, once you see what it can do and the type of power and options that you can get, I mean, it's crazy, and it's only going to get bigger.
And I love that it's all about the preservation for you guys. I find that interesting. We were talking in the pre-interview, and you use that term, several times. And I think you mentioned in the pre-interview that, hey, if a guy walked in with a Ford, was a GT40, right? That was new, clean, and beautiful. You'd probably tell him, nah, it's not something we're interested in. It's more so, the guy that walks in with the truck or the car that needs a restoration and the powertrain's pretty shot, that is at the end of its life, and you guys give it that new life and preserve it.
Yeah. I mean, our shop truck is really a perfect example of what you're just talking about. We have two Econoline pickups. We have one that is beautiful, stripped down, primer, immaculate, and we went out and we got a second one that was bondoed and shaved to look like a show truck, put on wheels, super clean, white. And what better thing to do to this? It had a 144 straight six, 90 horsepower, 3 on the tree, not very powerful. It's certainly not keeping up with today's traffic. You right outside our shop, you bang a right and people are going 50 miles an hour. So, this is a great test bed. Let's figure this out. Nobody has done this before in something like this. It's super different. So we ended up linking with some guys from California, and we took a look at the truck. We figured out what they had to offer, and we kind of developed a plan, to use some Hyper 9, which is a brand new motor and controller, and some Tesla battery modules, and we kind of got our shipment from them and set about, taking this vehicle and trying to figure out, how do we retain the spirit, the classicness, the head turner, if you will, the thing that's going to make people stop, and just update everything else. So the truck happens to be very unique in the fact that, like most vehicles, it has a gas tank, near the rear end underneath the back of the bed, but also has a 165-pound counterweight back there. Pre 63, early trucks like 61, you slam on the brakes really hard, they don't have the counterweight back there, and they'll just do a nosedive. So ironically enough, the truck actually was perfect to put batteries in it. Between the gas tank and 165-pound counterweight, all right, we can throw 300-400 pounds right there, no problem. So other than cutting a hole in the bed and building the framework to put the battery box and the cage and everything in, which you can see a lot of that on our Instagram if anybody's curious. Other than that, it's totally original. Original rear end, original drive shaft, original 3 on the tree. The Hyper 9, we made brand new motor mounts in the same mocked up outrigger style as the Econoline originally had. The motor goes right there. They have the doghouse between the front seats that you lift up. That way you can take a look at the motor, service it, all that. Everything fits in there just as is. Use the original radiator support, repurpose that for our coolers, put a couple of shelves in there to put the chargers, the DC to DC, everything else. But if you walk up to the truck, besides seeing a piece of plexiglass in the bed, you're not even going to know that it's electric. We have people all the time.
Or when it's driving down the road,
right.
And it, you don't hear the engine, the little putter of the engine. You just hear.
Yep. Just a little bit of a whir. Yep. Oh, people are blown away. A lot of guys, they see it and, they think we're going to start, fire it up and there's going to be like the puff of blue smoke and then you just see their jaw drop when you just kind of back up and roll away, dead silent. The car's on nice looking wheels. It's dropped a little bit. It's totally shaved, no body lines, so people are like, holy, that's crazy, man. What the heck? It's a real conversation starter.
That's super cool. So you kind of alluded to it, but I think, one thing that I find very interesting and I want to talk a lot more about is the process, right? So this is a relatively, new within the past decade type of business in general. Everybody obviously has a different process, but what's the proper process, right? To use kind of a play on words there. Say, me, Chris Piccone, rolls into Proper today with a CJ7, an 81 CJ7 that has a T176 4-speed transmission, mated to a Dana 300 transfer case, drive line's all good. axles all good, but the engine is just at the end of its life, right?
Okay.
But
Yep.
the body's all good. So from me dropping it off to picking it up, me dropping it off as a gasoline engine at the end of its life today, and then picking it up as a EV 8 to 12 months down the road. Fill in the blanks. What's
Right.
from start to
yeah.
finish?
Yep,
there?
of course. So you roll in tomorrow with your Jeep. First thing we're going to do is we're going to have a conversation. What are you looking for? What kind of power are you looking for? What kind of range are you looking for? What are you going to do with this thing? Tell me a little bit about yourself. Tell me about your Jeep. Let's kind of get to know each other and have a conversation and figure out, what are you looking for really? Because it really all starts with that. There's so many different ways you can do this. There's tons of variables. So it's very, very specific to the client. So you tell me, I want to use Tesla stuff, or I want to use all new components, or, so we start to figure that out. Okay, this kind of matches your power requirements, about here's how many batteries you might need for range. We kind of put together a proposal for you, send it out to you, you look it over, this is great. I'd like to get started. So from there, the first thing we're really going to do is that motor's coming out. Motor, gas tank, fuel lines, anything I don't need. That's it. See you later. Most guys want to keep this stuff. So we usually have a couple pallets set up. So everything will be pulled out, cleaned, washed, hosed off, degreased, stored, boxed up, put on pallets. If like I said, a lot of these guys, they'd want to take this stuff back. They want to keep it, whatever. If you want to throw it out, we throw it out. But, most of it's all clean and stored and put to the side until a customer can pick it up. Once we've done that, we really start to do the nitty gritty, measurements, all the math. Okay, weight distribution. How do we do this? So when your vehicle first came in that first day, we would have done a full initial inspection with you, including weighing your vehicle on all four corners so I can get axle weights and corner weights. So once we get to this point of doing the real math here, that comes into play as well. Do we want to retain the weight distribution the vehicle had from the factory? Do we want to change that weight distribution for some reason for either customer preference or safety or, what have you? Once we have a rough idea of range, we get a rough idea of battery weight. So we start figuring out where are we going to put the boxes, where are we going to put the motor, how are we doing this? You want to keep the transmission. In your case, we would keep it all. You want 4x4, you want the transfer case, you want a manual trans. Obviously, there are other options. You can go direct drive. You can go transmissionless if you wanted to build like a crawler or something. There are a few options, but for you, we would figure out, okay, we're keeping this transmission. Let's see what kind of uprated clutch we can get for it. You don't necessarily have to shift like the way you would in a gas vehicle. You don't really have to use the clutch always. You could stop the vehicle and you could put it in whatever gear you want. You could go. And the only time you'd really use the clutch is if you wanted to change gears on the fly. But we generally recommend, uprated clutch because the instantaneousness of the torque, So once we start to do that, it's kind of the same process all the way down the vehicle, inspecting every component and making sure, is it going to be able to handle the weight, or is it going to be able to handle the power, or is there some concern that needs addressing before, we do all of this. If you bring me a perfectly restored vehicle or a vehicle that's in great condition, there's not a ton of work that needs to be done. Sometimes, we recommend making sure you got four-wheel discs, new shocks and springs, things of that nature. But if the vehicle's already in great shape, for the most part, we don't have to do a lot. We don't want to be cutting holes in it and drilling and tapping and doing all of that. Everything is routed from the factory hose as much as possible. So after we go through the whole vehicle like that, we have a really good idea of where we're going to go from there, and we can start to order all the components that we would need. So wait time on average right now for ordering components is 4 to 6 months roughly. Batteries, controller, motor, screens, all the ancillary pieces as well. You can change that lead time depending on what you want to use. If you had said, I don't want my transmission, I don't want my transfer case, let's do some Tesla stuff. Okay, well, that's a different talk, we can get it in 3 months, 2 months, but it's very, very dependent on what we're building for you.
Okay.
So once we've got all that ordered, any other enhancements or modifications that need to be done to the vehicle are usually done in that waiting period. We take our deposit, we order your system, we get everything on the line from our suppliers, and then like I said, okay, maybe we need to do 4-wheel disc brakes, or maybe we want maybe you want a bigger lift kit or this or that, or anything under that. That's going to be done in that wait period. The goal here is at the end of that 4 to 6 months of waiting, that when the stuff comes in, your vehicle is totally ready. Whether you brought me something that was fully restored, or whether it's something that we were doing the restoration process on, that's completed while we're waiting for our components here. So once the components come in, then we've already done all of our measurements, all of our calculation, 99% of our parts ordering, and that's really fitment from there. Okay, now we got this motor, we're going to put it in, we're going to mock it up. Okay, let's get motor mounts in here, and then any fab work, that's going to be the first thing that gets done. So components will come in and out of the vehicle 3 or 4 times potentially, as far as like mocking up fitment, fab, in and out, finalize until, all of our brackets usually are sent out for paint or powder coating. So everything will move in and out a few times, but in essence, what we end up doing is assembling most of the vehicle and then pulling it out and then doing our final touches and dropping it back in. So after rough fitment is all said and done, we're going to polish up all the little pieces, make sure everything's painted, powder coated, nuts and bolts are all matching. I'm kind of a particular guy. So, you come in with your American car and, I have these guys, they send me stuff and it's metric screws here and SAE here. And I don't fly like that. So you come in with American car, every piece of hardware is going to be SAE.
That's
it's
cool.
all, are we doing gold zinc plated? Are we doing this? It's all very thought out, because this is such an individualized process. We want to build something that you have a hand in some of the designing, if you will, some of design inputs, choices, things like that. And we're trying to build this vehicle that fits you specifically, so it takes some time to do it. But, at the end of 8 to 12 months, like you said, you're rolling out of here with a beautifully restored car. You got any additional features you may or may not want on the vehicle, that things like one of the guys, he said, oh, I'd really love to have a inverter so that way I can use my espresso maker. I want to drive my kids to soccer, and I want to sit at the soccer field, and I want to plug in my Nespresso maker. And he's South African, so he enjoys his espresso. So that was something that we did for him. We built a totally custom center console. We hit an inverter inside of it, USB 110, the whole 9. So it's this very individualized experience of, you tell me what you want, and then we'll figure out how to cross that bridge together, and get you that end result that you want. And, doing things this way, we can change a lot of things. We can edit stuff. We can modify parts of a vehicle that may or may not have been the greatest necessarily, or update any sort of safety issues or things that need to be addressing. Because we want to future-proof these cars, if you will. A lot of it is making sure that you can pull out on the road and get on the highway or drive this vehicle the way you want it to be driven. A lot of these guys that come, we've mentioned that the air-cooled conversions, the reason they're so popular, they're notoriously unreliable. They didn't have a lot of power, and now you're giving a classic design the updated infrastructure to go down the road today.
I like how you call future proofing. That's pretty cool, man.
It's a term we use around the shop here and there. It's really what it's about. I have nothing against Tesla or any other electric or EV car manufacturers, but I personally, I don't want to drive down the road in that.
Yeah, that's cool, man. That makes two of us. I'd rather, I'm all about EV conversions. I find it so interesting, which is, I'm not sure what this episode is for, more myself or the listeners, because I find it that interesting. But with the EV conversions, obviously the components are a big piece of it, right? So you have the motor, the control panels, or the ECUs, or whatever they're called in the EV world, and obviously the batteries. Those are the three core components of it, right?
Yeah, for the most part, those are the biggest pieces. You're gonna have a motor of some sort. You're gonna have a controller that's responsible for taking the power from the batteries and supplying it to the motor. So the Hyper 9 is a 3-phase, so basically that controller is also converting to 3-phase for the motor. And then you have the batteries, like you said, and then usually you have a battery management system as well. So battery management systems are basically controlled via CAN bus, the way that any normal modern car ECU works. It's same type of technology, just different programming, if you will. But yeah, I mean, those are really your big pieces. Depending on situation, you're going to need coolers potentially, both for the batteries and especially for the motor and controller. Almost always you're going to need a cooler for that. The batteries, it's very dependent on how you set up the system. Some cars, they don't charge to a very high rate, so you don't really need cooling for the batteries. But you get above like 6.6 kilowatts or anything, DC fast charging, anything like that, the batteries are going to require a coolant system as well. But that's really the gist of it. I mean, compared to a gasoline car, you're really losing a lot of systems.
Now, it's interesting you talk about the cooling. Now, is that air cooled? Now, do you set up those as air cooled systems or liquid cooled systems?
So they're liquid cooled.
Wow. So electric and water, right? This is a whole. We just opened up.
Oh yeah.
We just opened up Pandora's box. So
yeah.
Explain to us how you air cool an electric component.
So,
I'm sorry, water cool.
Water cool. Yeah. So, like I'll use that Fiat that I built. So it's a 1971 Fiat 500. It has a small Curtis controller and a small Curtis motor in it, and it has 3 Tesla batteries, 1 up front, 2 in the back. Now, for him, I only gave him 3.3 kilowatt charging. So the only time batteries get hot for the most part is when they're charging.
Yeah.
So when you're running the vehicle, for the most part, even if your foot's to the floor, the batteries are not going to get hot the same way they do while charging. So that's the big critical component number 1. If you're going to be charging at a fast rate, your batteries are going to get hot. You're going to have to cool them. The motor and controller are a little different. Some motors are oil cooled. Most motors and controllers seem to be liquid cooled. Motor itself being air cooled, the controller in particular being liquid cooled. So with the Fiat, I set them up with plumbing inside the battery boxes. If you were to get batteries from Tesla, they all have 2 little fittings on them, every single one of them. And that is for don't think of coolant as like the way you would think of it for a gas car. Don't think of like 15 psi of pressure, a lot of flow rate. It's very low pressure, just a little bit of flow. It's just a circulation, if you will. And you just want that light circulation just to keep moving because, it'll wick heat away from the batteries. But it's not super major like you would think it is. For him with the low charging, he didn't even need it. It was just something I plumbed just because. Now, if you were to step up talking about something like our shop truck or the bus that I'm building right now, things are a little different. Our shop truck has 2 coolant systems in it, one specifically just for the controller. It's on its own loop. Now we're talking, you're thinking like a normal size radiator, right? I'm talking more like a transcooler.
Oh, okay.
Small,
so it's 12 by 12.
Yeah. Oh, super small, single spall fan, very, very small transcooler sized units. No big hunkin' radiators, very, very small single fan 12 volt units.
Like you ever
So
see a radiator on a K truck? You know,
yes,
like the
yes,
K trucks, like the
yeah.
right hand drive, the Japanese K
Yeah,
trucks, like
it's
those,
much
like
more
that
like that.
size.
Much more
Oh,
like
okay,
that.
cool.
You
All right, because
know,
I'm thinking like a big honking
no,
like
nope,
radiator up front with
nope.
the fan behind it, and a water pump somewhere on
Yep.
the front of this electric engine.
There is a fan and a water pump, but it's certainly not it's not big the way you would expect in a gasoline car. I use a very small Bosch electric water pump, just a simple in and out, no big deal. Small coolers or very small radiators depending on the situation. Um you know, and that takes care of the controller. Now the batteries, like on my truck, it's a totally separate closed loop. You got the coolant for the controller, coolant for batteries. So it's the same kind of setup, single fan, slightly bigger cooler than the other one, more similar to a small radiator. Single water pump once again. And that only goes, I have the coolers and everything up front, and that only runs to the back to the batteries. Now, that does circulate my coolant at all times. I can turn the pumps on and off on a switch, if it was really cold or whatever, if I had some reason to, I guess. And that will circulate at all times, but the only time it's necessary, like I said, is when we charge. So that truck has 6.6 kilowatt charging on it. So you figure it's still going to take, a good portion of the evening to charge it up, but with that level of charging and anything beyond that, we were required to have coolant. So yeah, you basically got a stack of batteries inside a billet box with a bunch of little coolant tubes running through each of them.
I'll be honest, I never expected this conversation to go to cooling. You think about an internal combustion engine. Obviously, an internal combustion engine needs cooling. It's something we talk about. And, when you talk about, hey, stripping down the powertrain and getting rid of like non-essential items, like, obviously, you're going to get rid of the alternator and things like that. I just assumed you also get rid of the cooling system. Does an electric, but I never thought that an electric engine and the components that are associated with it needed cooling. It makes sense, though.
Yeah,
it makes sense. It completely makes sense. That's interesting. Let's talk about the motors. So as we kind of go, there's a lot of options out there. Everything's pretty much component driven now. I know, in having the conversations I had, it's all pretty much component driven. You don't have, though there are a lot of guys working on, I'll call them crate engine-esque, EV swaps where, hey, we have a 350, we have this box that looks like a 350, a Chevy small block 350 that if you had a 350 in there, you could you pull out and put in, right? Everything mates up. Nobody's really at the goal line yet. A lot of people are doing R&D. They're in pre-production. Nobody's really at the goal line yet. We're about a couple years off from there. So everything is pretty much component driven with these. So let's talk about the engine components. There's a couple different options, and you mentioned those earlier. Tesla has one. There was another one that used
the Hyper 9.
The Hyper 9. What makes sense, for each application, right?
So it's very, like you said, it's very application dependent. We can go, depending on who we use for a motor. I mean, we can go down to, you want to power a go-kart, or, do you want 800 foot-pounds of torque? Anything and everything in between what I just said is possible. Now, once you divide that selection between used and new, you got some differences there. Primarily used guys right now, it seems to be a little bit more DIY, except for people wanting Tesla power. But you got Tesla and you got the Nissan Leaf. A lot of guys are taking like Gen 2, Gen 3 Leafs, I believe, salvage cars and pulling them apart and using those to power their conversions. If you want to go new, your options are getting bigger. You have companies that you would recognize, names like Borg Warner and stuff like that. They actually have clout and space in the EV world. They produce motors, Cascadia Motion and these other guys. They are working with OEMs, and that's where all this stuff is coming from. And that's where you got that range. The Hyper 9 has been a very solid motor for European and small classic car conversions. It'll do about 120 horsepower, 175 foot-pounds of torque. And then, like I said, you can go up to, Cascadia Motion and these other guys, you want 300 horsepower, 500, 800, they got something for everybody. So like you had said earlier, when if you rolled in my shop with your Jeep, that's one of the conversations we'd be having is, okay, well, what kind of power do you want to make? Do you want to make 200? Do you want to make 400? But like I said, it all comes down to what are you going to do with this vehicle? Right now we have cool. A Z28 Camaro 1979 that we've been toying with the idea of doing a full restoration and doing a swap on it. Now, obviously, 79 Z28 is not going to make a lot of horsepower, but it's still got a decent amount of torque. It's got a 350 in it still. It's a Z28. How do you do it justice? Well, it just so happens that, if you can get someone to make an adapter plate, you can throw in a motor that does 350 foot-pounds of torque, 350 horsepower, hook it up to a Tremec 5-speed, and have a nice day. Really. I mean,
that's cool.
It's very customizable. Just like you could take an LS and you could leave it, on stock power, or you could put cams and a tune and nitrous or turbos or whatever you want and go from stock power to 1,000 real quick. It's kind of the same thing here. Obviously you have to put the charging system and batteries in place to support that, but it's pick a number pretty much.
That's pretty neat. So there's a full range. So let's kind of like do an analogy type of exercise with these engines, right? So what would be my Cummins 12 valve option if I wanted that level of torque and power in the electric world?
So they have I can't think of the model number off the top of my head, but I was looking at one the other day that does you can do like a kind of like a similar truck style. You'll want a higher torque figure and a lower horsepower figure. I was looking at one the other day. It does about 500 foot-pounds of torque and about 3.25 horsepower. But you can step that up with these Teslas and these other things that these guys have. If you want that 800 foot-pounds of torque, I mean, you can do it. It's certainly, there's a number of guys who got skin in the game as far as motors go. I wasn't aware until I went to SEMA this year of how much these traditional OEMs are actually involved in this. But most of them have their names in building these motors or other pieces. Dana Spicer, they're all into it. They really are. You can go to almost any one of them now, and they're specializing in giving you one of these pieces of the puzzle.
That's pretty cool. So what would be like, if I wanted like LS type of, with like LS, type of power where, I need torque, but I want like max horsepower. What's my electric option, my EV engine option there?
Let's see. You could do like, I know there was one of these revolt systems. They're basically taking the Tesla stuff and building it into a brand new, different type of system. It's no longer a transaxle. Mm-hmm. It's oblong shaped, supposed to fit down the transmission tunnel and into the motor. Mm-hmm. And that'll do, torque is a little dependent, but that'll do your 600 horsepower.
Wow.
And then I know there's this other IM 375, I think it's called. It's a Cascadia Motions motor. Mm-hmm. And that'll do, I think it's like 5.25, maybe 550 horsepower, like 4.25 horse, or 4.25 foot-pounds of torque. So it's pretty dependent. And like I said,
these are some serious numbers too.
Oh yeah,
these this is like no joke. What's the weight difference between, say, like an LS and one of these Cascadia motors?
Weight is really a non-issue with EV motors.
It is.
You can take a lot of these small blocks, big blocks. I mean, you're talking 4, 5, 6, 7, 800 pounds, right? Motor and transmission. Now you got a motor that weighs 200 pounds.
Gotcha.
And makes the same or more power. So one of the biggest problems people run into with this is they want to they want to convert one of these V8 cars, a truck, muscle car, whatever, right? So like we just talked about, heavy transmission, heavy motor, it's all up front over the front wheels. So, people were just thinking, we'll pull the motor out, we'll put the EV motor, we'll put it right in. Well, every vehicle they were doing, why the heck is it sitting like this? It's all messed up. It's all, so they started figuring out, hey, we got to throw the batteries back in the front too, because those small blocks and big blocks weighed so much that, if you don't want to mess up the weight distribution, then, the electric motor weighs so little compared to it that you're throwing other stuff back in the engine bay just to get the weight back.
Wow. You brought up something interesting earlier, which is obviously, what's driving electrification is more effective, more efficient. But, the green movement is is a big part of what's driving electrification. And, the ultimate green move would be to recycle these powertrains, right? These EV powertrains. And you brought up, and I never even thought about that you have people, there's total losses out there, whatever it is, whatever the scenario is, total loss, theft, there are Nissan Leafs, there are Teslas, there are other EVs out there that are are going through insurance auctions, that are in junkyards. And this stuff has a longer lifespan. These motors, a lot of these components, the batteries, have a much longer lifespan than a internal combustion engine. So these things can be reused, and that's a whole nother fold. Have you guys done that, or is everything you've done so far all new components?
Most of the components that I use are new. It's just simply the way it's been. But on both our shop truck and the Fiat that we did, I did use Tesla battery modules for both of those. So obviously those came out of a used car. They went through a company that specifically takes Teslas and salvages as much as they can. They test the batteries, they warranty them for so long. But even the batteries, we all know that technology, by the time we get it in our hands, it's essentially obsolete. But these batteries, even if they are obsolete, the charging cycles on a lot of them are still going to outlast what a lot of people use them for. We've done the math a few times on even used Tesla batteries and the amount of charge cycles that they can take. And I mean, for the average person driving a classic vehicle and the amount that they're going to be driving it, even though from a technological standpoint, the batteries are long obsolete, they still got life in them too. So the DIY guys are all over this. Rich Rebuilds made this whole Tesla pulling apart thing extremely popular. He really brought it out into the forefront, and a lot of people said, wow, look at this, I could do that too. He doesn't know what he's doing, he's just figuring it out as he goes. I can do it. And so now you see tons of guys with the Tesla and the Leaf stuff, getting the salvage vehicles and auction vehicles, and putting them in different things. You have a source for the parts now. It is technically an OEM quality part. You should be able to get a lot of replacement pieces for most of these.
You can get them at the Nissan parts counter.
Exactly.
Which I never even thought of. Yeah, wow. Right.
Tesla's a little different, obviously. There's a lot of horror stories involved with, people trying to repair salvaged Teslas, or, you can't just call up your local Tesla service center and get parts. But things like Nissan and some of these other companies, I mean, they built so many of those vehicles, and they have to retain parts for them for so many years. So, I could reasonably assume that, on some of these pieces of motors and other equipment that you're salvaging, that, you can still get, pieces you would need to service this stuff as well. So it's a big option. It's a big DIY option. In our space, the big thing is Tesla as far as used stuff goes. People, some people, they just want, they think of a Tesla Plaid or whatever, and they just say, make me that, but in insert car here. So there's certain situations, but even the Tesla stuff now, people have figured out the limitations of their battery designs and how to use other batteries now to power Tesla motors and other things. So it's it's technology. It's kind of like Legos. Every day someone's figuring out some other path or some other way of getting something accomplished, and who knows what someone might figure out tomorrow.
Cool. And let's talk about batteries. It's one of the conversation that comes up all the time with EVs is range anxiety, right?
Yes.
Which we all know is overblown, right? How many, unless you're you're a delivery van or you're on the road all day long, 9 times out of 10, you're driving 20 or 30 miles at most to work. I mean, in this post-COVID era, most people work from home anyway, right? 20, 30 miles each way, and you're charging overnight. So at most you're 40 to 60, or hey, maybe you run some errands after work. You might go 80, 100 miles, right? At most in a day, right? But people have range anxiety and they need it, I need that 400, 450 miles, right? In reality, nobody's really using it, but everybody, wants to have that peace of mind. With a classic vehicle owner, we don't really have too much range anxiety because we don't need, like, I'll use myself as an example. I have my garage full of classic 4x4s and, am I driving them every day? No. Am I going to the garage to look at them and put a little smile on my face every day? Yes, right. But
of course,
am I driving them every day? And when I do take them out of the garage, again, mostly in the summer, not really in the winter too much. When I do take them out of the garage, I'm, taking them out to dinner or just using it to putz around on the weekends. Like, again, maybe in a given day, I might do 20, 30 miles, right? I'm not going long range. I will say my wife and we will take them up to the city every once in a while for dinner, which is fun. There's nothing cooler than driving a classic, up into the city. But again, we're talking 45 miles each way, 90 miles tops, right?
Yeah.
So what are the expectations for these EV conversions on, obviously the batteries play a huge variable into it. What are the expectations and what are you delivering for range in these EV conversions classics?
Well, most people's expectations are, how do I get the same amount of mileage that my gasoline car gets? And like you just said, you're driving a classic car. Where the heck are you going? So that's usually the first step of the conversation is they say, well, I want 500 horsepower and 300 miles of range. And then I have to ask them, well, where are you going? And then they say, well, I'm just putting around town. And I'm like, okay, well, you don't need that. Right now, here's the big thing. Batteries are the most expensive part of the conversion, hands down. They are also the heaviest part of the conversion. So the name of the game here is to get to the voltage and pack capacity that is required to run your system and get you the mileage that you want without just going crazy. Old Tesla 5.3 module weighs like 50 pounds or 55 pounds a piece or something. You're talking a Tesla's got 16 of those, in that skateboard underneath the car. So, where am I putting 800 pounds of battery in your car? It's not always going to work. Some vehicles I can find a place and I can put the batteries and it's not a big deal. But a lot of them you're not going to have the spot for it. You don't want to put that much weight. So it's a hard question on the owner. How far do you really want to go? I would say most people on average are getting like 1 to 200 mile range, I would say is pretty fair. It all depends on vehicle, aerodynamics, how many batteries, there's a lot that plays into it. Our shop truck has 5 Tesla 5.3 modules in it. And I would say in the summer when the batteries are happy in the warm temperature, you could go a good 80 or 90 miles with it. Living up here where it's cold, it really kills the range in the winter, unfortunately. There are ways to mitigate that. We talked about the cooling system earlier. You could add a heat pump into that cooling system to warm your batteries, which will help that pack sagging that happens in the winter. But yeah, I would say most people, you're talking, we could go down as low as like 50, 60 miles. But yeah, 50 miles all the way up to maybe 200 is on average what you're going to get.
So the sweet spot's 100 to 200 miles on this, which is, I don't know anybody who would really be using more, including myself. I couldn't even see myself using more than 100 miles, 200 miles a day. Like, even if we did go to the city for dinner, right? And it's 45 miles each way, obviously there's charging infrastructure up there. So,
Correct.
I couldn't even see, other than just putting around town, maybe 50 miles. So it's interesting how the differentiation between, for range anxiety, when you have that conversation with the customer, where what they want and what reality is, when people kind of open their eyes, they're like, wow, I would really ever need 400 or 500 miles.
I know we're all used to it. Obviously, you go to the pump, you slide your card in there, you stand there for a couple of minutes, and and then you're on your merry way. You click the little button, it says 400 miles to empty, and have a nice week, right? And that's what we're used to, and I understand that. But in the aspect of it being a classic car that you're, like you said, you're not driving it every day, you're not driving it far. I mean, it just really becomes pretty much a non-issue for the most part. There are certain use cases where I could see, I go on this specific, cruise every year with my car club, or we always take this car on this specific vacation or whatever. But yeah, for the most part, man, you're running around town. You're doing a couple errands, you're going to dinner, you take the grandkids to get ice cream, and then you put it away for the day and you charge it. And, just as easily, you can stop somewhere, plug it in, have some dinner, get a cup of coffee, whatever, grab 10, 15, 20%, keep on going, then go home if you have to too. It's not, I understand it. When we first built the truck, we were very unsure of its, theoretical mileage was one thing, but once you go to try to test that, you're like, oh man, I drove 50 miles out. Like, am I gonna be able to get back now? Like, this is really pushing it. But, we found out very quickly that, for the most part, we had no reason to be worried about getting stuck at all.
That's interesting. Now, this also brings up with classic trucks and these classic EV conversions is these, many of us out there have collections where we have multiple vehicles. So eventually down the line, somebody might have multiple EVs, right, within their classic truck or car collection. That's not being used every day. How do you preserve the batteries? Now, are you plugging it in? So say there's 2 weeks in between uses, right? Are you keeping it plugged in for those 2 weeks, or are you just getting it? How does the battery management software work? Do you have to go physically pull it out, or will the battery management system just stop taking juice out of the charger? Like, how does that all work? How does that process work?
All right, I'll use a shop truck as an example. So the way that's set up, you can drive it, go run errands, whatever, drive it into the shop, and it'll charge off either 110 or 220. It is a level 2 charging capable. That's what we use, level 2 charging cord. So because I do a lot of welding and fabrication, TIG welding and stuff like that, I have a dedicated breakout for 220. So most of the time we use the 220. We get our 6.6 kilowatt charging, and the battery management system will automatically turn off charging when it reaches a specific point. So
you don't have to unplug it or anything.
Nope.
So these things can stay plugged into the wall for weeks on end.
Yep. And
the battery management system will take care of everything from there.
Yeah. Yeah. If for some reason you had some event where it discharged dramatically, I'm sure it would pick back up on the charging. But I got to say, I've really had no issues with that. The biggest issue is just the 12-volt system. It is. So with the 12-volt battery, I have a specific little device that's wired in line on the positive side that after the battery gets at or below, I believe it's 12.2 volts. It basically internally, little circuit board in there severs the connection from the battery to everything else going out. So, I park the truck for 2 weeks or whatever, everybody goes on vacation or something, right? We come back in, you get in, it looks like it's dead. the screens aren't lit up, you put the key in, it doesn't do anything. All I got to do is tap a little button that's right under my seat, just the way that any of us would have a kill switch, or a fuel hidden cutoff, an anti-theft switch in any of our cars. It's the same thing. You just reach under the seat, just give it a little tap, battery comes to life, turns on. You still got 12 volts in your 12-volt house battery. You turn your key, you're good to go, man.
You actually bring up a good point. I never really thought about this because all the other ancillary systems in these classic vehicles are run off a 12 volt. The gauges, the lighting, the radio, all that stuff. You're not feeding that out of the EV battery pack. You're feeding that out of just a regular 12 volt, like an Optima, right?
You could use capacitors if for some reason you didn't want to have a 12 volt house battery. But it's primarily, this is how everything is designed. So instead of an alternator, you have a DC to DC converter. And one of the things that does is take your pack battery, whatever that voltage may be, and step it down to a reasonable number for a battery. So, with our system on, you get about 13.7, I would say, 13.8, about alternator charging voltage. So that while the system is running, that's powering everything. It's putting, a little current back into the house battery. Now, as long as the house battery doesn't get below that cutoff voltage, it's just like getting in your normal car. You open the door, the screens are on, you stick the key in, you turn it, you flip the switch, you go. But then, like I said, if you let the vehicle sit, then, the saver there will keep that house battery from being, because that's the big key. You have, depending on how you build your system, you could have 4, 5, 6, 700 volts right in that pack. Well, you got to be able to turn it on somehow. So you need 12 volts to start stepping up and opening up the contactors and everything else to get that battery voltage to flow into your system. So, whether it's with a battery or some other method, you got to have that 12 volts. So it's just the easiest way to do is just you use that DC to DC converter, just like an alternator. You put a cutoff switch in. You could get an old school turnstile cutoff switch like you'd have on a muscle car or anything if you really wanted. It doesn't have to be fancy, but that's really the only problem I've run into is that 12 volt battery being, potentially sitting for weeks or months and getting worn down just like any other battery. But,
interesting. But so when you're wiring up an accessory like a stereo or like, I like to go fish on the beach in Island Beach State Park in New Jersey. And a lot of time we surf fish at night. So I just installed rock lights, the rough country rock lights, the LED rock lights underneath my CJ7. So that when I'm out there and it's in the middle of the night, I can just turn them on and everything kind of, lights up around me underneath the truck. So when you're installing, say, rock lights, right? Yep. You're just doing it as you normally would, putting the relay on the firewall, putting the positive to the, to the battery, the house battery point of the 12 volt battery point and grounding it out to the body of the car, right? Yep.
Yeah. There's like two ways.
The switch inside.
Yeah. There's two ways you could do it. I mean, it could be super simple like that. You could just add it into the system, or, some of these vehicles I've retained the original wiring harness, so you find a way to work it in. Or some of these, you can order American Auto Wire or any of these companies, painless, you can order new harnesses. So the other way to do it is if you're already in the process of building it, it's just to build it right in.
Gotcha. Yeah,
grab power from a fuse circuit that's a blank circuit, label it, and then put your switch, put your relay, mount your lights, do it. It's all the 12 volt is the same as it's always been. You're just either hooking up right back to the battery like normal or to that DC to DC or the fuse box, but it's all exactly the same as building any of your other cars.
Interesting. That is super interesting. So as we kind of wrap up here, let's talk about timelines and price. Obviously, these conversions aren't inexpensive, right? But we've already instilled the value on what goes into these conversions, which is an immense amount of work.
Yes.
Timeline on average, and you actually already kind of gave us a good timeline on, hey, it's 4 to 6 months for waiting for components, but you're doing a lot of work in that period of time. So from the day I drop off that 81 CJ7 with the worn out internal combustion engine to the day I pick it up with as an EV powered classic 4-wheel drive, what's usually the range? Obviously not going to hold you to it on the timeline.
So biggest problem is component availability. If I call my guys and they say, yeah, we got it all, we can get it to you in 2 weeks. Well, you might be talking 3 months, 4 months, start to finish. The biggest problem right now is when I call my guys, they say, well, we'll get you this in a month and this in 4 months and this in 5 months and this in 2 months. And, because it's component based, you're at the mercy of all these different suppliers and when people are getting stuff in. And, unfortunately, ever since COVID, we've really struggled. Just the supply chain has been horrible. So I would say on average, if you would come in, we've picked out a system for you, you're probably waiting 4 to 6 months for the components to show up. Then from there, as long as we've done our job and done our homework, like we've talked about, everything else is already done. As components come in, if they trickle in early, if we got time, we start fitting things, mocking things up, planning out. So you figure you wait 4 to 6 months for the components and maybe another 3 months, 4 months to get the build finished. And that's, it's going to take 8 months, maybe a year, depending on, parts availability is a huge issue right now. So, I could order
8 to 12 months is realistic, though.
Yes.
If you think about if you were doing a full restoration, on a classic vehicle where you're rebuilding every component of the powertrain, you're putting a new wiring harness in, you're stripping out all the interior, in some cases doing a frame off, or you're doing a frame on. That's an 8 to 12 month horizon anyway. So it's actually not far off of a normal restoration.
No,
right?
No, it's really not. Because we still do a lot of restoration work. I would say on average, most of the full restorations that we do are taking roughly the same amount of time. And the ones that I have that we've started are projected to take about that same amount of time as well. So you're really absolutely correct. I mean, to think that 8 to 12 months is, it's fairly common in this industry, whether you're going with batteries or whether you want LS.
So here's the $1 million question, which is cost wise, right? What is the average? And again, obviously not going to hold you to anything. That obviously there's a lot of variables. You build these EV powertrains and these conversions. They're all bespoke based on what the customer wants, right? On average, what's the signed, sealed, delivered, I guess price range usually?
If you're talking something, especially if we're talking like V8 power, let me put that in there, muscle car, classic 4x4, things of that nature, you're going to start that at least 50,000. I mean, that's going to be the bottom line starting number. Is only going to go up from there. There are outliers. There are other things you can do. Say you don't want to use all new components. Maybe you want to go with Tesla, or maybe, there are numbers below that 50,000 mark. But the primary people that come in looking for my services, they want, like you said, a bespoke vehicle that fits them, brand new components, brand new batteries, brand new everything, and it starts at 50 and it just goes up from there.
Which actually, if you think about it, obviously you would always assume an EV conversion is going to have a premium associated with it. And as time goes on, the technology will get cheaper, like anything, right? But it's not that far off. Like, let's use an LS conversion as an example, right? You have to get the crate, right? And then you have the wiring harness, and obviously if you're doing an LS swap, right? You're doing an LS swap. You're obviously going to rebuild every other aspect of the powertrain or replace it. You're not just going to drop an LS in with a trans that has a mid-weight trans that has, 150,000 miles on it. You're going to do a full rebuild on the transfer case. You're going to get new drive shafts. You're going to rebuild the axles from start to finish. So you're not that. I mean, that could be on just a normal LS swap from start to finish. You could be not far off 30 grand right there.
Yes.
So yeah, the differential and the premium you're paying is not as much as I thought it would be. Number one, and that delta is only going to get smaller as time goes on, as the technology advances and gets cheaper.
Yes. The biggest hurdle is batteries. You can pick up a motor and controller, for a few $1,000s to up to maybe Tesla, used stuff's going for like 8, 10 perhaps right now. It's really the batteries that are the big budget killer right now. And like you said, as technology increases, the thing we're all waiting for in this space is batteries to become cheaper and smaller. Once that happens, it's going to be a big, big game changer.
We're eventually going to see an inverse relationship where the EV, at some point in time, the EV conversion is actually going to be less expensive than the internal combustion swap.
It's entirely possible, yes. I mean, with the way things are going, like I said, you're talking motor for motor, a built LS motor versus, a semi-capable EV electric motor of some sort, you're already in the same ballpark pretty much. So, and there are those
just
guys.
The batteries that are the big variable from a budget standpoint.
Right. But, there are those guys chasing power and building these motors that cost $20,000, $30,000, just 1,000 horsepower, nitrous drag car or whatever. And, once you start chasing that kind of power, and you're already getting to those figures, I think the difference actually becomes even less of a factor to talk about, really. You want to dump 100 grand in a car and make 500 or 600 horsepower and have a fully capable vehicle. You're pretty much right there no matter which way you slice it.
I can't wait till you get to go to the drag strip or the racetrack one day and you don't hear the rumble. All you hear is the.
Yeah, we've talked about that a lot. And then where I live too, we have a local track that's I would say it's maybe like 20-25 minutes from my house. And as the years have gone on, more and more days are becoming restricted track days now. And every year, the sound limits for the decibels just keeps dropping and dropping and dropping. One of the things I do when we have spare time to fill is I still do a lot of custom exhaust work, pipe bending, and fabrication. We talk to a lot of race car guys, and this sound decibel thing is really, really killing a lot of people too, because people are complaining about the volumes at the track. So we're sitting here going, well, don't you think we should build something to bring to the track or something, put a Tesla in something and go to the drag strip or something, just to show everybody, listen, I got plenty of cars here. I don't have any immediate plans to convert any of my own cars, but there's something to be said about it. And when you drive something like this for the first time, and there's no torque curve. There's no 5250 horsepower torque crossover anymore. I mean, it's pretty much just linear, straight shot. You got 800 foot-pounds on tap. You got it at 1 RPM.
Wow.
All the way. It's
amazing.
Yes, it's very, very different to a traditional power curve. And coming from where I came from, I was very, very blown away by how even a small motor making, 100, 200 horsepower could make me feel the way it does. Like it's not, you get a gas car with 175 horsepower and this thing's slow, 0 to 60 in 10 seconds, but you feel the same power differently in a different sort of fashion. And it's kind of, it's an eye opener.
That's pretty cool, man. I've driven a couple EVs and been nothing but impressed. But I will tell you, as that delta and that margin and that premium starts to get closer and closer, that will be my next conversion or swap will definitely be an EV. So Nate, man, I really can't thank you enough for joining us today on the Classic 4x4 podcast. For all of our listeners out there, you got to follow Proper EV on all the social channels. Check out their website, Proper Solutions Group. And if you're in the Northeast, in the New Milford, Connecticut area, and you're interested in converting your your classic or any vehicle in general to an EV, make sure you stop by the proper EV shop. So Nate, thanks a lot, man. I really appreciate your time today, and I learned a lot, to say the least.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks so much for having me. It was such great to have a conversation with somebody. You know, a lot of these people that we talk to, they either love it or they hate it. And I really like to see these people who are into it. You know, it makes me really happy to know that not everybody hates it, because it really is an option for a lot of people. And it may be one of the only ways we're going to be able to keep these beautiful vehicles on the road.
Hey, sometimes people don't like change, but you got to embrace the technology and understand that it's the future. No matter what, no matter how you slice or dice it, it's the future, and it's what's going to, it's how we're all going to be driving behind the wheel, you know, believe it or not, probably within the next decade.
Yeah,
so
I agree. Next 10, 20 years is going to be a big shift for this industry.
Definitely. So, hey, Nate, thanks a lot, man. Have a great day. Be well. And I appreciate your time.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks so much.
When innovation meets profit and intersects with production and economies of scale, absolutely amazing things happen. And that's the history we're living right now and experiencing with electric vehicles. I will tell you, this is a topic we will be discussing more in the future, hands down, no question. But before we do, stay tuned for our next and final episode of the season, where we flip the script and Brian Ellis from 4B Exchange joins as the host of the show and interviews yours truly.